The general strike, protesters flooded the streets, and liberals demanded a constitution. Amid the turmoil, on January 22, 1905, a young priest led a large group of workers in a peaceful march to the Winter Palace. Carrying religious icons, they planned to present a petition to the Tsar. But Nicholas II called in his troops. Tsarist soldiers opened fire on the crowd, killing more than 100 innocent people and wounding several hundred more. This event, known as Bloody Sunday, sparked the Russian Revolution of 1905.
Now, in 1914, Nicholas II made the fateful decision to drag Russia into World War I. Now, of course, we talked about World War I in class, and we looked at the main causes, which include that military buildup, alliances, imperialism, and that national pride. So we definitely argued that alliances is one of the main reasons why Russia jumped into World War I. Russia, remember, was sympathetic to Serbia. They share a same ethnic group. And so Russia backed Serbia when Austria-Hungary declared war after, again, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Now, Russia was unprepared to handle the military and economic costs of World War I. Keep in mind, Russia had not industrialized. It had very weak generals, poorly equipped troops, and there were just simply no match for the German army. Going back to Germany having that strong military, industrialized country, superior weaponry. We have German machine guns, submarines, tanks. For example, the guns just simply mowed down advancing Russians by the thousands. Defeat to follow defeat, and before the year had even passed, more than 4 million Russians had been killed, wounded, or taken prisoner. As in the Russo-Japanese War, Russia's involvement in World War I revealed the weakness of the Tsarist rule and the military leadership. Now, in 1915, Nicholas moved his headquarters to the war front. From there, he hoped to rally and discourage troops to victory. His wife, Tsarina Alexander, ran the government while he was away, but she ignored a lot of the Tsar's chief advisors that he'd left there in place to assist her. Instead, she came under the influences, probably one of the most mysterious, kind of interesting stories in history. She came under the influence of a man by the name of Rasputin. And Rasputin is kind of a self-described, books refer to him as a holy man, or kind of like a mystical man, and was supposedly to have sort of magical healing powers.
About Rasputin is not what the man did, but what he was perceived to have done or be doing by Russian society. And it's how he was perceived and the way that that destroyed the prestige of the dynasty that is really important in the history of the Russian Revolution.
If Rasputin was damaging the Tsar's name in the capital, the war was testing his subjects' loyalty throughout the rest of the empire. Wounded soldiers, recuperating far from their families, were torn by the letters that started to arrive from home. As a boy, Kolya Isaacek read such letters aloud to soldiers billeted in his school.
They were writing that, for example, Ivan had also been drafted, that one of them had to sell their cow, that the horse couldn't work anymore, that there were no men left in the village. All had been driven away to this carnage, and that we, women, are sowing and gathering in the harvest and doing the work of horses. Life had become very hard. There were no supplies left, no cotton or cloth, barely any kerosene.
Little clip, it kind of recapped Rasputin's kind of influence with the Tsar, but it also touched upon the fact that all the problems that were occurring. So just as Russia was getting involved in World War I, supportive of its allies, fighting on the Eastern Front, on the home front, we see most of the Russian people are struggling. They gave reference to the men are off fighting, the women are there at the home trying to harvest the grain, trying to take care of things back within, again, their villages and towns. We see that they're lacking resources because all the money, resources, fuel is being sent to the front lines to try to aid the soldiers. So things like, for example, they mentioned fuel or kerosene, which sounds simple, but if you're talking about freezing cold conditions, you're talking about the point where some people are lacking food, starvation. So you can sort of understatement that, you know, people are unhappy and looking for, again, the war to end. So, but the fact of the matter is, even though people are looking for their leaders, the government, to pull them away from this war and really address the problems at home, neither Nicholas nor Alexander proved very capable of trying to tackle these enormous problems. Now, local protests exploded into general uprisings pretty soon, and this is when we look at the period of the Russian Revolution known as the March Revolution. So it forced Tsar Nicholas to actually give up and actually abdicate, or basically give up his throne. A year later, revolutionaries actually executed Nicholas and his family. Now, very interesting story in terms of the execution. We won't go down that road yet. That could be something that also, again, we've heard the stories of Anastasia, the Russian princess. But sad to say, again, Nicholas and his family were executed. So the 3-century Tsarist rules of the Romanovs finally collapsed. The March Revolution succeeded in bringing down the Tsar, yet it actually failed to set up a strong government to replace his regime. So leaders in that representative body, that Duma that was created, at first they set up sort of a provisional government or a temporary government. And the leader who took up the temporary government was by the name of Alexander Kerensky. His decision to continue fighting in World War I cost him the support of both soldiers and civilians. So reminder, that was like one of the main reasons why Russians really were displeased with the Tsars, because they continued fighting even with all those hardships at home. So when the provisional government still is keeping them in the war, they're not happy with this. The war dragged on and conditions in Russia only worsened. Angry peasants, I should say, demanded land. City workers became more radical. And this is again where we see the introduction of more of those revolutionary ideas. Socialist revolutionaries competing for power formed what we're going to look at. They're called Soviets. And Soviets are basically local work councils consisting of workers, peasants, soldiers, and in many cases, they were the ones that are looking for change. The provisional government's in power is not doing enough, it's not changing enough. But in some cases, many of the cities, the Soviets, those councils, actually had more influence and more movement than even the provisional government. The Germans believed that Lenin, and we introduced Vladimir Lenin earlier, and his Bolshevik supporters, the more the radical revolutionaries, would stir unrest in Russia and hurt Russia in the war effort against Germany. And even though Lenin previously had been asked to leave and kicked out of Russia, Germany actually arranged Lenin to return to Russia after many years of exile. And traveling sealed away in a railroad boxcar, Lenin actually reached Petrograd in April of 1917. Lenin and the Bolsheviks soon gained control of the Petrograd Soviet, as well as many Soviets and other Russian cities. By the fall of 1917, people in the cities were rallying, "All power to the Soviets." And Lenin's slogan, which we introduced earlier in the Flip lecture, "Peace, land, and bread," gained widespread appeal. Lenin decided to take action. In November 1917, without warning, armed factory workers stormed the Winter Palace in Petrograd. Calling themselves the Bolshevik Red Guards, they took over the government officers, and arrested the leaders of the provisional government. Kerensky and his colleagues disappeared almost as quickly as the Tsarist regime had been replaced. Within days after the Bolshevik takeover, Lenin ordered all farmland being distributed amongst the peasants. Lenin and the Bolsheviks gave control to the factories to the workers. The Bolshevik government also signed a truce with Germany to stop all fighting and began peace talks. In March 1918, Russia and Germany signed the Treaty of the Brest-Litovsk, and Russia surrendered a large part of its territory to Germany and its allies. The humiliating terms of the treaty triggered a widespread anger among Russians. They objected to the Bolsheviks and their policies and to the murder of the royal family. This is where we're going to see a civil war begin in Russia.